Hello, my dear friends. Tonight, we begin a slow and careful journey into the daily life of ancient Egypt, a world shaped by the Nile, ritual, routine, and belief. This is not a story of exaggeration or modern ideas, but a historical exploration of how ancient Egyptians experienced altered states, elevation, and distance from ordinary life in ways that may seem surprising today. As you listen, allow the pace to slow. This history unfolds gently, step by step, just as Egyptian life itself once did. To understand how ancient Egyptians reached states that can be described as higher, we must first understand what height meant to them. In Egyptian thought, being higher was not only physical, it was spiritual, symbolic, and deeply connected to order. Temples were built on raised ground. Pyramids rose toward the sky. Priests ascended steps before entering sacred spaces. Height represented closeness to the divine, distance from ordinary life, and entry into a different state of being. This concept shaped architecture, ritual, and daily practice long before we consider substances or altered awareness. The Nile defined Egyptian life, but elevation defined Egyptian meaning. The land rose from the riverbanks into desert plateaus, and this physical rise mirrored a symbolic journey. Ordinary work happened low, near the water. Sacred actions happened higher, on platforms, rooftops, or elevated interiors. This separation mattered. To move upward was to leave daily concerns behind. Egyptian society repeatedly used height to create controlled transitions from normal awareness into sacred focus. This was not accidental but carefully designed through space and routine. Temples offer the clearest historical evidence of this practice. Egyptian temples were not entered casually. Movement through them was slow and deliberate. Floors rose gradually. Ceilings lowered. Light dimmed. Sound softened. By the time a priest reached the inner sanctuary, ordinary perception had changed. This architectural journey produced a mental and sensory shift. Modern historians describe this as intentional environmental control. Ancient Egyptians understood that space could change awareness without substances, lifting the mind into a heightened state through design alone. Ritual preparation added another layer. Priests followed strict routines before entering sacred areas. They washed repeatedly, shaved their bodies, fasted, and observed silence. These actions altered physical sensation and mental focus. Hunger, repetition, and isolation created a state far removed from everyday experience. This was a controlled and socially accepted way of reaching a higher state of awareness. Egyptian texts describe this condition as purity, but historically it functioned as a deliberate mental elevation. Music, rhythm, and scent further supported this transition. Temple rituals used drums, chanting, and repeated phrases spoken slowly. Incense filled enclosed spaces, altering breathing and sensory perception. These elements worked together. Sound, smell, movement, and silence shaped consciousness gently but effectively. The goal was not loss of control, but deep focus and separation from ordinary thought. Egyptian society valued these controlled, elevated states because they were believed to bring humans closer to divine order. Even outside temples, height and altered experience appeared in daily religious life. Rooftops were used for prayer. Raised platforms supported rituals. Tombs were built into cliffs or elevated ground. The dead were placed higher than the living, reinforcing the idea that elevation marked transition into another state. This belief shaped how Egyptians understood life, death, and awareness. To rise was to change condition. At this early stage of our journey, it becomes clear that ancient Egyptians understood how to move beyond ordinary awareness without chaos. They used structure, repetition, space, and ritual to guide the mind upward. This was not accidental intoxication, but disciplined elevation. Their society created safe, meaningful ways to leave normal consciousness behind and return again, grounded in order. As this first part comes to rest, imagine the slow ascent of stone steps at dusk. The noise of daily life fades. The air grows still. A different awareness begins to form. This is where our long history begins, not with shock or excess, but with careful control and deep intention. Historical evidence shows that ancient Egyptians did not rely only on architecture and ritual to reach elevated states of awareness. They also made careful and repeated use of natural substances found in their environment, especially plants and resins that affected mood, perception, and focus. These substances were not taken casually. They were integrated into religious practice, medical treatment, and elite ceremony under strict rules. Egyptian society distinguished clearly between ordinary daily life and moments when the mind was intentionally guided into a different state. This separation ensured control and meaning rather than disorder. One of the most frequently discussed substances in Egyptian history is the blue lotus flower, known today as Nymphaea caerulea. Artistic depictions from tombs, temples, and papyri show the blue lotus held close to the nose, worn in hair, or floating in bowls at banquets. These images are not symbolic alone. Scientific analysis and historical interpretation suggest that the blue lotus contained compounds capable of producing mild relaxation and altered perception when consumed or inhaled. Egyptians prepared the flower carefully, often soaking it in wine or using it in ritual contexts rather than everyday meals. This controlled preparation indicates intentional use rather than coincidence. Banquet scenes from tomb paintings provide further historical insight. These gatherings were not ordinary meals. They followed religious calendars and were often associated with funerary rites, festivals, or elite social rituals. Participants are shown reclining, holding lotus flowers, listening to music, and engaging in slow, structured celebration. The repeated appearance of the blue lotus in these scenes suggests that it played a role in creating a calm, elevated atmosphere. The goal was not loss of control, but gentle detachment from ordinary concerns, allowing participants to experience pleasure, reflection, and closeness to the divine. Incense was another essential element in shaping altered states in ancient Egypt. Temple records describe the burning of resins such as frankincense and myrrh during rituals. These substances affected breathing, scent perception, and mood. Incense was burned in enclosed spaces, often repeatedly, filling the air with thick aromatic smoke. This environment altered sensory experience gradually. Combined with chanting and controlled movement, incense supported sustained focus and mental elevation. Its use was restricted to sacred or ceremonial contexts, reinforcing the idea that altered awareness was purposeful and regulated. Egyptian medical texts further support the controlled use of psychoactive plants. Papyri describe mixtures used to calm the mind, ease pain, or induce sleep-like states. These preparations were administered by trained practitioners and often combined with spoken formulas or prayers. This combination of substance and ritual reflects a belief that physical and mental states were closely connected. Altering perception was acceptable when done within an ordered framework that respected divine balance. Social hierarchy also shaped who could access these substances. Priests, healers, and elites had greater exposure to ritual plants and resins. Ordinary laborers lived structured lives focused on routine and survival, with limited access to such experiences. This distinction suggests that elevated states were considered powerful and potentially disruptive if misused. By restricting access, Egyptian society maintained control over altered awareness, integrating it into systems of authority and belief. From a historical perspective, ancient Egyptians did not view these practices as intoxication in the modern sense. They understood altered states as tools. These states allowed communication with gods, deeper reflection, or emotional release within safe boundaries. The repeated, regulated use of plants and incense shows intentional design rather than accidental discovery. Egyptians knew which substances affected the mind and how to use them without breaking social order. As this part draws to a quiet pause, imagine the scent of incense rising slowly in a dim temple chamber. A lotus rests in a bowl of liquid nearby. Sound fades. The ordinary world feels distant. This controlled elevation was not escape, but connection. And this is only one layer of how ancient Egyptians reached higher states of experience within their carefully balanced world. Historical records show that wine played a significant role in how ancient Egyptians experienced controlled intoxication, especially among elites, priests, and during religious festivals. Unlike beer, which was consumed daily by all classes as nourishment, wine was rarer, stronger, and more closely associated with ceremony and elevated experience. Archaeological evidence from vineyards, wine jars, and tomb inscriptions indicates that wine production was carefully managed and often labeled with information about origin, year, and quality. This attention suggests that Egyptians understood wine's effects and treated it with respect rather than casual use. Wine was closely connected to religious celebration and divine association. The god Osiris, linked to rebirth and fertility, was often associated with wine, and festival calendars included occasions where drinking was ritually permitted and even encouraged. One of the most historically significant examples is the Festival of Drunkenness, connected to the goddess Hathor. Temple inscriptions describe controlled ritual intoxication during this festival, where participants drank wine to reach a joyful, altered state believed to please the goddess and restore cosmic balance. This was not uncontrolled chaos, but a socially sanctioned moment where altered consciousness had religious meaning. Elite banquet scenes provide further insight into how wine shaped elevated experience. Tomb paintings depict guests reclining, drinking wine, listening to music, and engaging in slow conversation. These banquets followed strict social rules and were often tied to funerary or religious contexts. Wine was served alongside music, incense, and flowers, such as the blue lotus, creating a layered sensory environment. This combination amplified wine's effects, producing relaxation, emotional openness, and a sense of distance from daily labor. These scenes reflect a deliberate use of wine to create refined, heightened awareness, rather than excess. Egyptian texts and imagery also reveal awareness of wine's dangers. Warnings against uncontrolled drinking appear in wisdom literature, emphasizing moderation and self-control. This suggests that Egyptians recognized intoxication as powerful, but potentially disruptive. By limiting wine consumption to specific times, places, and social groups, society maintained balance. Wine was a tool for elevation, not an everyday escape. Its power was respected and contained within ritual and elite life. Medical papyri further show wine used as a carrier for medicinal and ritual substances. Herbs and flowers were soaked in wine to extract their properties, combining physical and mental effects. These mixtures were administered intentionally, often accompanied by spoken formulas. This practice reflects a belief that wine could open the body and mind to transformation when used correctly. The combination of wine, plants, and ritual language created a controlled pathway to altered experience. From a historical perspective, wine in ancient Egypt functioned as a regulated gateway to heightened states. It was integrated into religion, elite culture, and medicine under clear boundaries. Egyptians did not pursue intoxication for its own sake. They used wine to mark transitions between ordinary time and festival time, between daily labor and sacred celebration, between the human and the divine. As this part settles, imagine a quiet banquet hall lit by oil lamps. Wine is poured slowly. Music drifts through the air. Laughter is soft, measured, and ritual-bound. The world feels lighter, slower, and gently distant. This was elevation with intention, shaped by culture and belief, and carefully returned to balance when the moment ended. Historical evidence shows that while wine was reserved for ritual moments and elite gatherings, beer formed the foundation of everyday Egyptian life and created a constant, low-level, altered state that modern audiences often underestimate. Beer in ancient Egypt was not a luxury or an occasional indulgence. It was a daily staple consumed by men, women, and children alike. Archaeological remains from bakeries, breweries, work sites, and domestic spaces show that beer production was widespread and continuous. Unlike modern beer, Egyptian beer was thick, lightly fermented, and consumed in large quantities. This made it both nourishment and a mild intoxicant woven directly into daily routine. Beer was closely linked to bread, and the two were often produced together. Egyptian beer was commonly made by partially baking bread, crumbling it into water, and allowing it to ferment naturally. This process created a drink rich in calories and nutrients, but also containing alcohol. Because fermentation was not precisely controlled, alcohol levels varied, but consistent consumption throughout the day meant that many people lived in a gently altered state most of the time. This was not considered intoxication in a negative sense. It was simply normal life. Historical texts and artistic depictions suggest that mild drunkenness was accepted and expected within limits. Labor records from state projects provide important insight. Workers on temples, tombs, and royal construction sites were paid in rations that included beer. These rations were carefully calculated and distributed daily. Beer supported physical labor by providing hydration, calories, and relaxation after work. The mild psychoactive effect likely reduced discomfort, fatigue, and stress, allowing large labor forces to function efficiently under harsh conditions. From a historical perspective, This suggests that Egyptian society knowingly relied on fermentation to support both body and mind at scale. Religious and symbolic meanings further reinforced beer's role. Beer was associated with gods such as Hathor and Sekhmet, deities connected to emotion, transformation, and altered states. Mythological texts describe beer used to calm divine rage or restore balance. These stories reflect lived experience. Egyptians understood that fermented drinks could change mood and perception, and they integrated this knowledge into both myth and practice. Beer was not simply tolerated, it was culturally meaningful. Domestic scenes and household records show beer consumed throughout the day. Morning, midday, and evening consumption blurred clear boundaries between sobriety and intoxication by modern standards. Children consumed weaker beer, while adults drank stronger versions. This gradual exposure created tolerance and familiarity. Egyptians did not experience alcohol as a dramatic break from normal awareness, but as part of a continuous mental environment shaped by fermentation, routine, and labor. From a historical perspective, this daily normalized intoxication is one of the most striking aspects of Egyptian life. Modern societies often separate intoxication from productivity, but ancient Egypt integrated them. Beer supported work, ritual, social bonding, and emotional regulation. It created a society that was rarely fully sober in the modern sense, yet deeply ordered and functional. This challenges modern assumptions about altered states and control. As this part comes to rest, imagine the rhythm of a workday along the Nile. Bread is eaten, beer is shared, the sun is high, and the body moves steadily. The mind feels slightly softened, the edges of effort smoothed by fermentation. This was not escape, but endurance. And through beer, ancient Egyptians lived daily life gently elevated, sustained by one of the oldest and most powerful tools of human chemistry. Historical evidence shows that the most powerful altered experiences in ancient Egypt did not come from a single source, but from carefully layered combinations of environment, substance, sound, and ritual timing. Egyptians rarely relied on one method alone. Instead, they combined beer, wine, sacred plants, incense, music, rhythm, movement, and controlled space to guide the mind into elevated states in a gradual and socially accepted way. This layered approach allowed for depth without loss of control. Each element was familiar on its own, but together they created experiences that felt profoundly different from ordinary daily life. Festival records and temple inscriptions describe events that lasted many hours or even days, during which participants moved through carefully structured sequences. These events often began with purification and fasting, followed by music and chanting, then the introduction of fermented drinks and ritual substances. Beer provided a steady, low-level intoxication that softened the body and mind. Wine, introduced later, deepened emotional openness and sensory sensitivity. Sacred plants and incense altered breathing, scent perception, and mood. None of these elements acted suddenly. The effect was cumulative, building slowly as the ritual progressed. Music played a central role in amplifying these effects. Drums, clappers, sistrums, and chanting created repetitive rhythms that encouraged focus and trance-like attention. Egyptian music was not designed for excitement, but for continuity and flow. Repetition allowed the mind to settle into a steady pattern, reducing distraction. Historical depictions show musicians positioned close to ritual participants, suggesting intentional sound immersion. Combined with alcohol and incense, rhythm helped synchronize physical sensation and mental focus, producing a shared, elevated state within the group. Movement and posture further shaped these experiences. Participants often swayed, reclined, or moved slowly in time with music. This gentle motion reinforced relaxation and sensory awareness. Temple spaces were designed to support this process. Narrow corridors, rising floors, dim lighting, and enclosed chambers reduced external stimulation while enhancing internal perception. These architectural choices worked alongside substances and sound to create environments where ordinary awareness faded naturally. Timing also mattered. Many rituals took place at night when oil lamps replaced sunlight and shadows softened visual perception. Darkness reduced external cues and heightened sensitivity to sound and scent. Festivals aligned with lunar cycles or seasonal changes, reinforcing a sense of transition. These moments marked symbolic crossings between ordinary time and sacred time. Altered states achieved during these periods were understood as temporary, meaningful departures from daily life, rather than permanent changes. Social structure ensured control. Participation in the deepest rituals was limited by status, role, and preparation. Priests, musicians, and trained participants guided the process. Knowledge of when to begin, deepen, and end elevation was passed down through tradition. This prevented chaos and ensured that participants returned safely to normal awareness. Egyptian society valued balance above all else, and even their most intense experiences were framed within order. From a historical perspective, this multi-layered approach explains why ancient Egyptian altered states were sustainable across centuries. They were not accidental or recreational in the modern sense. They were technologies of experience, developed through observation and refined through tradition. Egyptians understood that the mind could be guided gently and reliably using familiar tools combined in deliberate ways. As this part settles into quiet, imagine a festival night along the Nile. Music repeats softly. Incense drifts through warm air. Beer and wine have been shared slowly. Bodies move gently. Minds feel distant from daily labor and attention turns inward and upward. This was not excess. It was design. And through this design, ancient Egyptians reached heights of experience that were structured, meaningful, and deeply woven into their world. Historical evidence shows that in ancient Egypt, access to the deepest altered states was not left to chance or individual experimentation. Instead, these experiences were carefully guided by trained specialists who understood how to manage the body, mind, and environment together. Priests, healers, and ritual practitioners acted as professionals of altered awareness. Their role was not only religious but practical. They knew when elevation was appropriate, how far it should go, and how to return participants safely to ordinary life. This professional control ensured that altered states strengthened social order rather than disrupted it. Priests occupied the highest level of this system. Temple records and inscriptions show that priests followed strict rules governing diet, sleep, cleanliness, and sexual activity. These rules were not symbolic alone. They altered physical sensation and mental focus over long periods. Through fasting, repetitive ritual, and isolation from ordinary life, priests maintained a constant state of heightened awareness even before ceremonies began. When combined with incense, chanting, and sacred substances. This preparation allowed priests to enter deep altered states while remaining disciplined and controlled. Healers, often referred to as physicians or magical practitioners, used altered states in medical contexts. Egyptian medical papyri describe treatments that combined herbs, oils, alcohol, and spoken formulas. These treatments were not purely physical. They relied on changing perception, calming the patient, and shifting mental focus. Healers understood that fear, pain, and anxiety affected the body. By guiding patients into relaxed or dreamlike states, they supported healing. This practice shows that Egyptians recognized altered consciousness as a therapeutic tool, not only a religious one. Dream incubation offers further historical insight. Certain temples were associated with healing dreams, where individuals slept in sacred spaces after ritual preparation. Incense, chanting, fasting, and isolation prepared the mind. The resulting dreams were believed to carry divine messages or guidance. From a historical perspective, this process intentionally altered sleep patterns and sensory input, increasing the likelihood of vivid dreams. Priests interpreted these experiences, reinforcing their authority as guides between ordinary and elevated states. Social boundaries played an essential role in maintaining control. Not everyone could become a priest or healer. Training required years of discipline and knowledge passed down within institutions. This restriction prevented widespread misuse of substances or practices that could destabilize daily life. Altered states were powerful and respected. By placing them under professional supervision, Egyptian society ensured balance. Historical depictions often show priests calm, composed, and focused even during intense ritual activity. This suggests that altered states were not associated with loss of self, but with heightened concentration. Egyptians valued clarity within elevation. The goal was not escape, but alignment with divine order, known as Mat. Any experience that threatened balance was considered dangerous and avoided. From a historical perspective, this system of professional guidance explains how ancient Egypt maintained stability despite widespread exposure to intoxicating substances. Beer, wine, plants, incense, rhythm, and ritual were powerful tools, but they were not used randomly. Priests and healers acted as guardians of experience, ensuring that elevation served meaning and order. As this part comes to rest, imagine a quiet temple chamber just before dawn. A priest stands still, breath slow, senses sharpened. Incense lingers in the air. The mind feels lifted, focused, and calm. This was not chaos or excess. It was mastery. And through this mastery, ancient Egyptians reached states of awareness that were both elevated and controlled, deeply woven into the structure of their civilization. Historical evidence shows that dreams, visions, and trance-like states were among the most respected ways ancient Egyptians experienced elevated awareness. These states were not considered random or meaningless. Instead, they were understood as structured moments when the boundary between the human and divine worlds became thin. Egyptian texts, temple practices, and burial inscriptions all point to a culture that treated dreams and visions as real experiences with practical value. To the Egyptians, the mind at rest or in trance could reach places the waking mind could not. Dreams held a special position in Egyptian belief. They were seen as messages, warnings, or guidance sent by gods or ancestors. Dream manuals found on papyri list different dream symbols and their meanings, showing that dreams were studied, categorized, and interpreted systematically. This suggests that Egyptians did not view dreams as passive events. They believed dreams could be encouraged, shaped, and understood through preparation. Altered states during sleep were therefore intentional experiences, not accidents. Dream incubation was one of the clearest methods used to reach these states. Individuals seeking guidance or healing would spend the night in sacred spaces, often within temple complexes. Before sleeping, they followed rituals that included fasting, washing, prayer, and sometimes the use of incense or calming substances. These actions changed physical and mental conditions, making vivid dreams more likely. Priests supervised this process and later interpreted the dreams, reinforcing their role as mediators between ordinary and elevated awareness. Trance states were also achieved while awake, especially during ritual performance. Repetition played a key role. Chanting the same words again and again, moving rhythmically, and focusing on sacred symbols allowed attention to narrow and deepen. Over time, this repetition reduced awareness of the outside world. Historical descriptions and artistic scenes show priests and ritual participants entering still, focused states where time seemed to slow. These moments were not chaotic. Participants remained upright, controlled, and responsive, indicating that trance was understood as heightened focus rather than loss of control. Visions were closely connected to these trance-like conditions. Egyptian texts describe moments when gods appeared, spoke, or made their will known. From a historical perspective, these visions likely occurred during altered states shaped by environment, ritual, and expectation. Dim lighting, incense-filled air, fasting, and emotional preparation all increased the intensity of perception. The resulting visions felt real and meaningful to participants, reinforcing belief systems and social order. Importantly, not everyone could access or interpret these experiences independently. Authority mattered. Priests, temple officials, and trained interpreters controlled how dreams and visions were understood. This ensured that altered experiences supported established religious and political structures rather than challenging them. Elevated states were powerful, and their meaning was carefully guided to maintain balance. From a historical viewpoint, dreams and trance states provided ancient Egyptians with a structured way to explore the unknown without chaos. These experiences offered comfort, direction, and reassurance in a world shaped by uncertainty. They also allowed individuals to feel connected to something larger than themselves, reinforcing shared belief and identity. As this part settles into quiet, imagine a sleeper lying within a temple courtyard. Oil lamps flicker softly nearby. Incense drifts through the night air. The body is still, the mind open. A dream begins to form, vivid and calm, carrying meaning beyond words. For ancient Egyptians, this was not imagination alone. It was a journey upward, into a higher state where guidance could be found. Historical evidence shows that altered and elevated states of awareness in ancient Egypt were not limited to religion or healing alone. Over time, these experiences became closely connected to morality, law, and social control. Egyptian society believed that order in the universe depended on Mat, a concept representing balance, truth, and harmony. Elevated states, whether reached through ritual, dreams, or controlled intoxication were understood as moments when individuals could better perceive this cosmic order. Because of this belief, altered awareness was treated as a tool for reinforcing correct behavior rather than escaping responsibility. Egyptian law was not written as a fixed code in the modern sense. Instead, justice was understood as the application of ma'at in specific situations. Priests, officials, and judges were expected to align their decisions with divine order. Historical texts suggest that ritual preparation, prayer, and symbolic purification were part of legal and administrative life. These practices altered mental focus, encouraging calm, reflection, and detachment from personal emotion. In this way, elevated states supported governance by promoting self-control and alignment with accepted moral values. Moral instruction texts, often called wisdom literature, reveal how Egyptians viewed emotional excess and uncontrolled intoxication as threats to order. These texts warn against losing awareness, acting impulsively, or forgetting one's social role. At the same time, they accept controlled elevation when guided by tradition. This distinction shows that Egyptian society did not reject altered states outright. Instead, it drew clear boundaries between disciplined elevation and chaotic behavior. Altered awareness was acceptable only when it strengthened moral understanding and social harmony. Public rituals reinforced this moral framework. Festivals that involved intoxication, music, and celebration were carefully timed and regulated. Participants entered elevated states temporarily, then returned to ordinary life. This cycle reinforced the idea that release and control were both necessary. By allowing controlled elevation within specific contexts, society reduced the likelihood of uncontrolled behavior outside them. From a historical perspective, this functioned as a form of social regulation, channeling human desire for altered experience into predictable and meaningful patterns. Authority figures played a crucial role in maintaining this balance. Priests, judges, and officials were trained to interpret divine signs, dreams, and ritual outcomes. Their interpretations guided moral and legal decisions. Because these figures controlled the meaning of elevated experiences, they also controlled how society understood right and wrong. Altered states did not challenge authority, they reinforced it. Experiences that might otherwise have been disruptive were absorbed into existing structures of power and belief. Historical records also suggest that individuals who failed to control themselves during intoxication or ritual risked social disapproval. Shame, loss of reputation, or exclusion could follow excessive behavior. This social pressure encouraged moderation. Egyptians valued clarity, restraint, and awareness even when the mind was elevated. The goal was insight, not abandonment of responsibility. From a historical perspective, this integration of altered states into morality and law reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Ancient Egyptians recognized that people seek relief, meaning, and transcendence. Rather than suppressing these desires, they structured them. By linking elevation to ma'at, society ensured that higher states of awareness served stability rather than chaos. As this part comes to rest, imagine a quiet hall where judgment is given. Incense lingers softly. The judge is calm, focused, detached from personal emotion. Thought feels clear and elevated, aligned with order rather than impulse. In ancient Egypt, even law and morality were shaped by controlled elevation. guiding society gently but firmly toward balance. Historical evidence shows that for ordinary people in ancient Egypt, living in a slightly altered or elevated state was not unusual or dramatic. It was normal. Daily life along the Nile followed rhythms shaped by climate, labor, and tradition. And within these rhythms, mild elevation of mind and body was constant. Beer was consumed from morning to evening, bread was fermented, incense drifted through homes and streets, and repetitive work encouraged steady, almost meditative focus. These conditions created a mental environment very different from modern expectations of constant alert sobriety. For farmers, builders, boatmen, and craftsmen, the day began early and involved repetitive physical labor. Archaeological and textual sources suggest that beer was consumed before work and during breaks. This beer was nourishing and hydrating, but also mildly intoxicating. Its effects softened fatigue and reduced physical discomfort. Over time, bodies and minds adapted. Workers did not experience this state as impairment, but as the baseline condition of life. This gentle elevation supported endurance and routine, allowing people to work long hours under harsh conditions. Domestic life followed similar patterns. In households, incense was burned for cleanliness, ritual, and scent. Oil lamps filled enclosed spaces with warm light and drifting smoke. Meals were slow, shared, and repetitive. These environments reduced sharp sensory contrast and encouraged calm awareness. Children grew up within this atmosphere, learning to associate mild sensory alteration with comfort and normality. As a result, altered perception was not feared or exotic. It was familiar. Religious belief further shaped daily perception. Gods were understood to be present everywhere, not distant. Everyday actions were linked to cosmic order. This belief encouraged constant mindfulness rather than emotional intensity. Even when slightly intoxicated, individuals were expected to behave according to social norms. The elevated state did not excuse disorder. Instead, it was integrated into responsibility. This expectation reinforced self-control within altered awareness. Markets, festivals, and communal gatherings extended this experience socially. Music, chanting, and rhythmic movement accompanied daily events, not only formal rituals. These sounds created continuity between work and celebration. Ordinary people moved through days where sensory input was steady, repetitive, and immersive. Modern historians note that such conditions naturally encourage trance-like focus, without requiring deliberate intention. In ancient Egypt, this was simply how life felt. Importantly, historical records show little evidence of panic or moral concern about everyday intoxication among common people. This absence suggests social acceptance. Problems arose only when behavior disrupted order. As long as individuals fulfilled roles and respected boundaries, mild elevation was tolerated and expected. This acceptance allowed society to function smoothly, despite widespread exposure to psychoactive elements. From a historical perspective, this reveals a fundamental difference between ancient and modern life. Ancient Egyptians did not divide existence into strict categories of sober versus intoxicated. Instead, they lived within a spectrum of awareness, shaped by environment, diet, belief, and routine. Being slightly elevated was not an event. It was the background condition of life. As this part settles into quiet, imagine a village at sunset. Workers return from the fields. Beer is shared. Incense rises gently from doorways. Lamps flicker. Voices are calm. Minds feel softened, steady, and present. For ancient Egyptians, this was not escape or excess. It was ordinary life lived a little higher than we might expect today. Historical evidence shows that despite their widespread use of intoxicating substances and altered states, ancient Egyptians maintained remarkably clear boundaries around control, responsibility, and limits. Their society did not collapse into disorder, and this was not accidental. Egyptians understood that elevation without structure could become dangerous. As a result, they developed cultural rules, moral teachings, and social expectations that defined when elevation was acceptable and when it crossed into excess. These limits were not enforced only by law, but by shared understanding shaped through education, tradition, and social pressure. Wisdom literature provides some of the clearest insight into these boundaries. Texts written for young men entering public life warned against losing awareness, forgetting duties, or speaking carelessly while intoxicated. These writings did not forbid drinking or altered states entirely. Instead, they emphasized moderation and awareness. The danger was not elevation itself, but loss of self-control. A person who forgot their role, disrespected elders, or disrupted harmony threatened Ma'at. This moral framing shaped behavior more effectively than punishment alone. Social reputation played a powerful role in regulation. In a tightly connected society, behavior was visible and remembered. Someone who repeatedly acted foolishly under the influence risked shame, loss of trust, or exclusion from important roles. This informal control system encouraged individuals to regulate themselves. Elevation was acceptable when it remained quiet, controlled, and appropriate to context. Excess was discouraged not through fear, but through loss of respect. For Egyptians, honor mattered deeply. Ritual context further defined limits. Festivals allowed intoxication, but only at specific times and places. Outside those moments, restraint was expected. This separation helped prevent constant escalation. By containing intense experiences within ritual calendars, society avoided blur between sacred elevation and everyday obligation. Once the festival ended, life returned to routine. This clear boundary reinforced stability. Priests and officials modeled ideal behavior. Even when participating in rituals involving altered states, they maintained composure and dignity. Artistic depictions consistently show calm posture and controlled movement. These images communicated expectations visually. Elevation was compatible with order only when guided by discipline. Loss of control was not admired. It was a failure to align with divine balance. Medical texts also reveal awareness of danger. Certain substances were restricted or carefully dosed. Healers combined them with ritual words and supervision. This suggests recognition of physical and mental risk. Egyptians did not experiment freely. Knowledge was controlled, passed through trusted lineages. This prevented misuse and protected social order. From a historical perspective, ancient Egypt demonstrates that widespread intoxication does not automatically produce chaos. What matters is structure. Egyptians embedded altered states within systems of meaning, responsibility, and timing. They allowed elevation but not escape from duty. This balance explains how their civilization remained stable for thousands of years. despite living in conditions that modern societies might consider constantly altered. As this part comes to rest, imagine a quiet moment after a festival. The music fades, lamps burn lower. People return home, calm and composed. The elevated state dissolves gently back into routine. This return mattered as much as the rise. Ancient Egyptians knew not only how to go higher, but how to come back down without harm. Historical analysis shows that modern audiences often underestimate how elevated everyday life in ancient Egypt truly was, largely because modern thinking separates altered states from productivity, morality, and order. This separation did not exist in the Egyptian worldview. For Egyptians, the mind, body, environment, and divine order were interconnected. What modern observers might label as intoxication or altered consciousness was, in ancient terms, simply part of being human within a balanced world. This difference in perspective has led many historians in the past to downplay or misinterpret the depth of elevation present in Egyptian daily life. One reason for this misunderstanding lies in modern definitions of sobriety. Today, clarity is often equated with total chemical neutrality. In ancient Egypt, clarity meant alignment with Ma'at. A person could be mildly intoxicated and still be considered clear-minded if they behaved correctly, fulfilled duties, and respected social boundaries. Egyptian texts judge behavior, not chemical state. As long as actions supported balance, elevation was acceptable. This explains why widespread consumption of beer, ritual wine use, incense inhalation, and sensory immersion did not trigger moral panic or legal suppression. Archaeology supports this interpretation. The sheer scale of beer production, the constant presence of incense burners, and the abundance of ritual spaces designed to alter perception suggest that elevated states were not marginal practices. They were central. These materials appear not only in elite contexts but in ordinary homes, work sites, and villages. If altered awareness had been considered dangerous or shameful, such evidence would be rare or hidden. Instead, it is open and widespread, indicating acceptance. Modern bias also plays a role. Many early historians approached ancient Egypt through a moral lens shaped by later religious and cultural values that emphasized restraint and abstinence. As a result, references to intoxication were often dismissed as symbolic or exaggerated. However, cross-comparison of texts, art, and physical remains now shows consistency. Egyptians were intentional, knowledgeable, and experienced in shaping consciousness. They were not naive users of substances. They understood dosage, timing, and context. Another factor is the survival of Egyptian civilization itself. A society that endured for millennia could not have functioned under constant chaos. The fact that Egypt remained stable suggests that its use of elevation worked within its system. Rather than weakening society, controlled altered states supported emotional regulation, social bonding, religious devotion, and endurance under difficult conditions. This challenges modern assumptions that productivity requires strict sobriety. From a historical perspective, ancient Egyptians lived in a world where sensory richness, fermentation, rhythm, and ritual shaped awareness from birth. This created a baseline mental state that was calmer, slower, and more immersive than modern life. When Egyptians sought higher states, they built upon this foundation. The result was a society that lived, quite literally, higher than we might expect, yet remained deeply ordered. As this part settles, imagine standing in an Egyptian village at dusk. The air smells of bread, beer, and incense. Lamps glow softly. Sounds are rhythmic and familiar. The mind feels gently lifted, not sharp or hurried. For the Egyptians, this was normal. And when we understand this, we begin to see their world not as primitive or restrained, but as subtly and continuously elevated. Historical reflection shows that ancient Egypt offers one of the clearest long-term examples of how a civilization integrated altered states of awareness into everyday life without losing stability. Rather than treating elevation as a problem to eliminate, Egyptians treated it as a condition to understand, guide, and balance. Their approach was not accidental. It emerged slowly through experience, tradition, and observation. Over generations, Egyptians learned how the human mind responded to rhythm, fermentation, scent, repetition, and ritual, and they built social systems that worked with these responses rather than against them. At the heart of this system was the concept of balance. Elevated states were never meant to replace ordinary life. They were meant to support it. Beer softened daily labor but did not excuse irresponsibility. Ritual intoxication brought joy and release but returned people to order. Dreams and visions offered guidance but required interpretation and restraint. Even the most intense experiences were framed as temporary crossings, followed by return. This rhythm of rise and return protected society from excess and gave meaning to altered awareness. Ancient Egyptians also understood that environment shapes consciousness. Their homes, temples, streets, and landscapes were designed to influence perception gently. Light, shadow, sound, and movement worked together to create a slower, more immersive experience of life. Combined with mild, constant fermentation and ritual scent, this environment produced a population that lived in a different mental tempo than modern societies. Time felt less sharp, attention less fragmented. This baseline made higher states easier to reach and easier to control. Social learning reinforced these patterns from childhood. People grew up watching elders drink, celebrate, pray, dream, and return to duty without confusion. This modeling taught limits without formal instruction. Elevated awareness was not mysterious or rebellious. It was familiar and expected. Because of this familiarity, Egyptians did not chase extremes. They already lived slightly above ordinary awareness, making dramatic excess unnecessary. From a historical perspective, this challenges modern ideas about consciousness and productivity. Ancient Egypt demonstrates that societies can function, create monumental architecture, maintain complex administration, and preserve long cultural continuity without demanding constant chemical neutrality. What mattered was not sobriety, but alignment. As long as individuals acted within social and moral boundaries, their internal state was secondary. This understanding helps explain why Egyptian civilization lasted so long. Its people were not constantly resisting human impulses. Instead, they acknowledged them and gave them structured expression. Elevation was not an enemy of order. When guided correctly, it became one of its supports. As this part comes to rest, imagine the Nile flowing steadily at night. Lamps glow along the riverbank. The air is warm, scented, and calm. Minds feel lifted but grounded, aware but unhurried. This was the world ancient Egyptians lived in, a world where being higher was not escape but a quiet companion to daily life. Historical evidence, when viewed as a whole, shows that the ancient Egyptian relationship with elevated states was neither accidental nor primitive. It was the result of long cultural refinement. Over centuries, Egyptians observed how human awareness responded to food, drink, scent, sound, light, and repetition. They adjusted daily routines, religious calendars, and social rules accordingly. This gradual tuning created a society in which altered awareness was predictable and manageable. Elevation became part of the background fabric of life rather than an event that disrupted it. One of the clearest historical indicators of this refinement is consistency. Across different dynasties, regions, and social classes, similar patterns appear. Beer remains central to daily nourishment. Wine appears repeatedly in ritual and elite settings. Incense, music, and rhythm persist in temples and homes. Dream interpretation manuals continue across centuries. This consistency suggests intentional preservation rather than coincidence. Egyptians kept what worked. Practices that supported endurance, cohesion, and meaning were retained, while uncontrolled excess was discouraged. The archaeological record supports this stability. Tools for brewing, vessels for wine, burners for incense, and instruments for music appear in large numbers and ordinary contexts. These objects are not hidden or rare. They are common, worn, and practical. This material evidence shows that elevated states were not secret or forbidden. They were visible, regulated, and socially understood. The absence of widespread prohibitions or moral panic further supports this interpretation. Historical comparison also matters. When Egyptian practices are compared to those of neighboring cultures, similarities appear. But Egypt stands out for scale and duration. Other societies experienced periods of ritual intoxication or trance, but few integrated them so deeply into daily life for so long. Egypt's geographical stability, agricultural rhythm, and religious worldview allowed this integration to persist. The Nile's predictability supported a culture that valued balance, repetition, and moderation, even within elevation. Importantly, ancient Egyptians did not seek constant intensity. Their approach favored steadiness. Mild daily elevation created comfort and familiarity. Stronger experiences were reserved for specific times and guided by professionals. This hierarchy of intensity prevented escalation. People did not need to chase extremes because meaningful altered states were already available within accepted boundaries. This reduced social tension and reinforced trust in tradition. From a historical perspective, this system explains why Egyptian society could support monumental labor, complex administration, and long-term continuity without demanding harsh discipline over human desire. Instead of suppressing the need for relief, connection, and transcendence, Egyptians structured it. Altered awareness became another resource to manage, like water or grain. When managed well, it supported rather than threatened order. As this part comes to rest, imagine generations passing along the Nile. The same practices repeat quietly. Beer is brewed, incense burns, music sounds, dreams are discussed. People rise slightly above ordinary awareness, then return again. Century after century, this rhythm continues. It is slow, controlled, and deeply human. Through this rhythm, Ancient Egyptians lived higher than we often imagine, not in rebellion against order, but in harmony with it. Historical evidence shows that festivals were the moments when ancient Egyptian society allowed elevation to expand beyond everyday levels, while still remaining within strict cultural boundaries. These festivals were not random celebrations. They were carefully timed according to religious calendars, seasonal changes, and agricultural cycles. During these periods, ordinary rules softened, but they did not disappear. Elevation increased, but control remained. This balance made festivals powerful without becoming destructive. One of the most important examples is the series of festivals dedicated to Hathor, a goddess associated with joy, music, intoxication, emotion, and transformation. Temple inscriptions describe these festivals as times when participants drank, sang, danced, and entered joyful, altered states to honor the goddess. Wine and beer flowed more freely than usual. Music became louder and more repetitive, and movement filled temple courtyards. These conditions produced deep emotional and sensory elevation. Yet these events were supervised by priests and organized by temple authorities. Entry, timing, and ritual sequence were controlled. The historical purpose of these festivals was restoration rather than excess. Egyptian mythology describes moments when divine forces became unbalanced and required calming through joy and intoxication. Humans participated in these rituals to mirror cosmic healing. From a historical perspective, this reflects psychological insight. Periodic release prevented long-term tension. Elevation was used as medicine for society itself. By allowing intense experiences at specific times, Egyptians avoided constant pressure that might otherwise lead to uncontrolled behavior. Processions further enhanced these experiences. Statues of gods were carried through streets accompanied by music, chanting, incense, and drink. Crowds moved together slowly, creating collective rhythm. Repetition and shared movement reduced individual awareness and strengthened group identity. This collective elevation bonded communities and reinforced shared belief. The experience was not private intoxication, but social and emotional synchronization. Nighttime festivals intensified these effects. Darkness softened vision, oil lamps flickered, and incense thickened the air. Sound traveled differently at night, and time felt slower. These environmental changes amplified the effects of alcohol and rhythm. Historical descriptions suggest that participants experienced strong emotional release, laughter, tears, and a sense of closeness to gods and each other. Yet even here, social roles remained intact. There is little evidence of violence or collapse of order during festivals. This suggests that Egyptians had internalized limits deeply. From a historical viewpoint, festivals reveal how ancient Egypt managed collective elevation safely. Rather than suppressing human desire for altered experience, society scheduled it. The calendar itself became a regulator of consciousness. People knew when elevation was allowed to rise and when it must return to baseline. This predictability reduced anxiety and reinforced trust in tradition. As this part comes to rest, imagine a temple courtyard at night during a festival. Music echoes against stone walls. Lamps glow warmly. Wine is shared. Voices rise and fall together. The crowd feels lifted, unified, and emotionally open. This was not disorder. It was a controlled ascent, built into the rhythm of Egyptian life. Historical records show that among all Egyptian celebrations, Certain festivals were designed specifically to push participants into deeper states of emotional and mental elevation than everyday life allowed. These festivals were not spontaneous gatherings. They followed ancient traditions recorded in temple walls, reliefs, and ritual calendars. One of the most revealing examples is what modern historians often call the Festival of Drunkenness, associated with the goddess Hathor, and sometimes linked to Sekhmet. This festival reveals how far Egyptian society allowed elevation to go, while still keeping it meaningful and contained. According to temple inscriptions and mythological texts, the origins of this festival lie in a story of divine imbalance. Sekhmet, a powerful and destructive force, threatened the world with unchecked rage. The gods intervened not with punishment, but with intoxication. Beer dyed red to resemble blood was poured out, and Sekhmet drank it, becoming calm and joyful. Hathor emerged in her place as a goddess of pleasure and harmony. From a historical perspective, this myth reflects deep psychological understanding. Egyptians believed that excess force could be softened through controlled intoxication and joy rather than repression. During the festival itself, large quantities of beer and wine were consumed openly. Music, dance, chanting, and laughter filled temple spaces. Archaeological evidence suggests that participants drank far more than during normal ritual occasions. Yet even here, structure remained. The festival occurred at a specific time of year, often linked to seasonal change and renewal. Participants entered the experience together and left it together. There is no evidence that this elevation spilled into everyday chaos afterward. Instead, the festival functioned as a release valve for emotional and mental pressure built up over time. Another major festival that contributed to elevated states was the Opet Festival. Although less focused on intoxication, it created powerful altered awareness through procession, environment, and duration. Statues of gods were carried from Karnak to Luxor along the Nile, accompanied by priests, musicians, and crowds. The journey lasted days. Repetition, fatigue, heat, sound, and sacred anticipation gradually altered perception. Even without heavy drinking, participants entered a liminal state where ordinary time felt suspended. The slow movement of the procession itself functioned as a consciousness-shaping tool. Within temples, inner rituals intensified these effects further. Only select priests entered the deepest chambers, where light was minimal and silence heavy. Incense burned continuously, air grew thick, and chanting echoed softly. Fasting often preceded these rituals, increasing sensitivity. Combined with belief and expectation, these conditions created powerful internal experiences. Priests reported divine presence, insight, and communication. From a historical viewpoint, these were controlled trance states produced by environment and discipline rather than uncontrolled intoxication. Importantly, Egyptian society understood that not everyone needed to reach the deepest levels. Most people participated at outer levels through music, drink, and celebration. Deeper access required training, preparation, and responsibility. This layered participation prevented overload. People experienced elevation appropriate to their role. This system allowed society to explore intense states safely, without destabilizing daily function. Festivals also strengthened memory and identity. Repeated participation across a lifetime taught people what elevation felt like, how far it could go, and how to return. These experiences were shared across generations. Children watched adults celebrate, then return calmly to routine. This taught boundaries without formal instruction. Elevation was not mysterious. It was familiar, cyclical, and contained. From a historical perspective, these festivals demonstrate that ancient Egyptians were not accidentally intoxicated. They were deliberate. They knew when to intensify experience and when to soften it. Their calendar itself functioned as a regulator of consciousness. This long-term management explains why Egyptian society could sustain intense ritual life without collapse. As this part comes to rest, imagine the final hours of a great festival. The music slows. Lamps burn low. People sit quietly, tired but peaceful. The elevated state gently fades. Tomorrow, work will resume. The Nile will flow. Balance returns. This rhythm of rise and return was not weakness, it was wisdom, practiced for centuries. Historical evidence shows that the experience of elevated states in ancient Egypt was not uniform across society. Different groups encountered different depths, intensities, and meanings of elevation depending on role, status, and training. This layered structure ensured that altered awareness served purpose rather than chaos. The same society that allowed mass intoxication during festivals also maintained strict control over who could go deeper, how often, and in what context. This balance between access and restriction reveals a highly developed understanding of consciousness. For ordinary people, elevation was woven into daily life through mild and constant influences. Beer consumption, fermented bread, incense smoke, repetitive labor, and rhythmic sound shaped awareness gently. These influences rarely produced overwhelming effects. Instead, they created a steady mental softness, a sense of slowed time, and reduced sharpness. This state supported endurance, cooperation, and emotional regulation. From a historical perspective, this baseline elevation was not considered special. It was simply how life felt. For elites, elevation went further. Wealth allowed access to stronger wine, imported substances, private banquets, and carefully curated environments. Elite homes were enclosed, shaded, and scented. Music was slower and more refined. Drinking was deliberate and prolonged. Tomb paintings show elites reclining for long periods, holding lotus flowers, surrounded by musicians and attendants. These scenes suggest sustained altered states lasting hours rather than moments. Elevation here was associated with refinement, reflection, and closeness to the divine, not labor relief. Priests occupied the deepest level of this hierarchy. Their elevation was not based on excess, but on deprivation and control. Fasting, sexual abstinence, ritual bathing, isolation, and silence altered physiology and perception over time. Combined with incense, chanting, and darkness, these conditions produced powerful internal experiences. Priests entered trance, vision, and deep focus while remaining outwardly composed. This was professional elevation, cultivated slowly and maintained through discipline. The Egyptian priesthood functioned as specialists of consciousness. Sacred substances further illustrate this divide. Certain plants and resins were restricted to ritual use. Blue lotus, when prepared properly, produced relaxation and dreamlike perception. Incense resins altered breathing and sensory awareness. These substances were not consumed casually. Preparation mattered. Timing mattered. Supervision mattered. This control prevented misuse and preserved meaning. Egyptians understood that potency required boundaries. Wine itself functioned differently across classes. For laborers, wine was rare and special. For elites, it was a tool of sustained elevation. For priests, it was symbolic and controlled. Medical papyri show wine used as a solvent for plant compounds, enhancing their effects. This indicates technical knowledge of chemistry long before modern science. Egyptians may not have known molecular theory, but they knew practice. Another overlooked factor is environment. Egyptian architecture intentionally shaped perception. Narrow corridors, rising floors, lowering ceilings, dim light, and echoing sound altered spatial awareness. Temples were not neutral spaces. They guided attention inward. Combined with fatigue, incense, and belief, these environments produced strong altered states without substances. This architectural psychology was refined over centuries and replicated across regions. Time itself was manipulated. Rituals lasted hours. Festivals lasted days. Processions slowed movement. Waiting became part of the experience. Modern life compresses time. Egyptian ritual expanded it. This expansion altered consciousness deeply. When time feels long and repetitive, the mind enters different modes of awareness. Egyptians understood this intuitively. Social expectation amplified these effects. Belief shapes perception. Egyptians expected gods to appear, guidance to come, emotions to rise. This expectation primed the mind. When combined with physical and sensory changes, experiences felt real and meaningful. This does not reduce them to imagination. It explains their consistency and power. Importantly, Egyptians also understood limits. Not everyone could or should go deep. Too much elevation without preparation was dangerous. Wisdom texts warn against losing awareness, speaking foolishly, or forgetting duty. These warnings show awareness of risk. Elevation was powerful. Power required restraint. From a historical perspective, ancient Egypt presents one of the most sophisticated early systems of consciousness management. Elevation was not rebellion. It was infrastructure. Substances, architecture, ritual, time, and belief worked together to guide human experience. This system supported a civilization that lasted for millennia. As this very long part settles, imagine layers of experience unfolding simultaneously across Egypt. A farmer drinks beer and feels steady. An elite reclines in scented shade, drifting gently. A priest stands fasting in darkness, mind sharp and distant. All are elevated, but in different ways at different depths within the same society. This was not accidental. It was design. As we bring this long historical journey to a gentle pause, it becomes clear that ancient Egypt was a civilization deeply aware of the human mind and its needs. Elevation in many forms was not hidden, denied, or feared. Instead, it was understood, structured, and woven carefully into daily life. Through food, drink, ritual, architecture, music, scent, and belief, Egyptians shaped consciousness in ways that feel surprising even today. What appears extraordinary to modern eyes was, for them, ordinary and balanced, and, across villages, temples, festivals, and homes, Egyptians lived within a spectrum of awareness rather than a single fixed state. Mild elevation supported labor and endurance. Deeper elevation supported ritual, healing, and meaning. The deepest states were reserved for those trained to handle them. This layered approach allowed society to remain stable while still exploring powerful human experiences. Elevation did not weaken order. When guided correctly, it supported it. What stands out most in the historical record is control. Egyptians knew how to rise, but they also knew how to return. Every festival ended. Every ritual closed. Every altered state flowed back into routine. This rhythm of ascent and return protected individuals and the wider society. It allowed joy, release, and transcendence without collapse. Few civilizations managed this balance so successfully for so long. As the night grows quiet, imagine ancient Egypt settling into rest. Lamps dim along the Nile. The scent of incense fades. Minds soften back into ordinary awareness. Life continues, steady and enduring. The elevated states have done their work, leaving behind balance rather than excess. Here we gently close this chapter of history. The story rests, complete for now, held within the long memory of human experience.